Justice S.K. Kaul said that there should be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that should look into issues of Jammu and Kashmir. And he said that Truth and Reconciliation Commission could facilitate a reparative approach for the wounds of the past and forms the basis for achieving a shared national identity. Good. Definitely, this is a great idea. Let me explain. S.K. Kaul was following an approach used in South African context. They also had this Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And the purpose of Truth and Reconciliation Commission would be something like, tell the truth. That's all. But this truth shouldn't be leading to punishment. No. Often truth involves clean confessions by the aggressor and forgiveness by the victim. In that context, forgiveness by the blacks and confessions by the whites. And there was no revenge idea. Okay. So basically, to heal the wounds, of course, if any compensation requires to be paid, compensation can be paid. But it is not like punishment or revenge. And this is about truth. This is supposed to lead to reconciliation with the past. Reconciliation between the communities. Okay. So, this is a, you can say, a good approach. So, the justice says this is what he recommended, and also he seems to be very proud of what he said. Okay, he is giving interviews on why he proposed such a commission. Okay, but then the problem is, why shouldn't this judgment itself say a bit of truth? A bit. How can judgment be given what it is? They can give a judgment like this and then ask the government to go for truth and reconciliation. Why shouldn't the judgment itself be a part of truth and reconciliation? And then ask the judgment to proceed further. Okay. So which means a judgment that would look into past. There need not be a big inquiry into it, but at least different kinds of arguments, evidence, reading of it, and then explaining the past. Okay, explaining the past is not undoing the past. It is not like that. Is not undoing the past. We can't undo the past. Okay. So let us consider the basic issue. Because the judgment said about Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India, and so that 370 is temporary, and because they said it, shouldn't they go into how Jammu and Kashmir in the first place became an integral part? that how integral part. Okay, when did it become integral part, and what are the circumstances? So what prevents a judgment or the Supreme Court look into these circumstances? And if you look into these circumstances, we can say India has to confront what I call very, very inconvenient truth. This inconvenient truth is the central problem of Jammu and Kashmir and India relationship. What is this inconvenient truth? This inconvenient truth is regarding whether Jammu and Kashmir ever gave consent to be a part of India. What do the facts show? When did Kashmiris give consent to India? This is the serious question. Okay. Nehru promised, India promised. Okay. And of course, BJP would not have promised, or RSS would not have promised, because it was essentially Hindu land. But then Nehru promised plebiscite on whether the people want Jammu and Kashmir to be a part of India. Plebiscite was promised, but it was never held, which means people did not say yes. That's about plebiscite. Why plebiscite was not held was a different issue, but the fact is plebiscite was not held, which means people did not give any formal consent, which was promised as a part of accession, in Jammu and Kashmir's accession to India, because prince was Hindu and majority was Muslims, and it was a princely state, and the consent was needed, like the way consent was taken from Junagadh, like the way consent was obvious in Nizam's Hyderabad. Okay, but this consent was never taken. Then how did it become integral part? Because there was a constituent assembly. Jammu and Kashmir Constituent Assembly was asked to pass a resolution that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India. Jammu and Kashmir Constituent Assembly is not the same thing as people. People elected this Constituent Assembly. It is not, plebiscite is asking people directly. So it was asked to pass. But did Constituent Assembly accept? Do you know? It refused. And you know what happened? Sheikh Abdullah, its leader, then Prime Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, refused. He and 15 others removed from the assembly of only 75 members. So 15 out of 75 checked out, and only 60 remained. And interestingly, even these 75 are not a result of free and fair elections held in 1951. Many candidates who are not for India were disqualified from contesting. So 1951 elections, doubtful, and then 15 of them refused. And Sheikh Abdullah was arrested, jailed in 1953. And he was released only in 1964, that is 10 years. Okay. So, how did Jammu and Kashmir become an integral part of India? It is the purged Constituent Assembly passed a resolution in 1956 that Jammu and Kashmir is independent. See, look, this is a very serious question, and shouldn't Supreme Court look into the issues of circumstantial issues to understand what was temporary about it? But it didn't do so. So, purged Constituent Assembly passes a resolution while its leaders are jailed. So much for Jammu and Kashmir being an integral part. But did any Indian leaders raise this? Interestingly, one leader raised this issue. But later, it was Jayaprakash Narayan. So look at what he said so clearly. The Kashmir Constituent Assembly adopted in 1956 a constitution which declared that the state of Jammu and Kashmir and these shall be an integral part of India. But it was 3 years after Sheikh Abdullah's arrest. And he says that may not be considered important, because the really important question is that the decision of the Constituent Assembly cannot be equated with the referendum, which the Prime Minister had solemnly pledged. So plebiscite was not held, and then purged Constituent Assembly made Jammu and Kashmir part of. And so he says, Kashmir is a part of India and is a fact of history that people say that I think is the worst form of auto-suggestion. So according to Jayaprakash Narayan, Kashmir is a part of India, integral part, is an auto-suggestion, it seems, and written during 64 to 66. So this is what one of the leaders who was concerned about fate of democracy in India said on Jammu and Kashmir. Supreme Court should look into the issues like this. That is the way to look at the foundations on which Indian political system was based. Okay. So it means that consent apparently never came. So what does it mean? That is an issue. But this is not to say that we should undo the process. We are not saying that. We are just saying that this should be a part of truth. And this should be the basis for reconciliation. Okay. Also part of the truth is violence that followed over the years. So all this court could have gone into, which means its judgment itself can be a part of truth and reconciliation. But this Justice S.K. Kaul gives interviews now, and in his interviews, because he is retired, he seems to be very contented with his judgment. I am not talking about contentment about other issues in his life, but I am not talking about 370 judgment. He seems to be happy. He thinks he has done a very good thing. But I don't see any reasons for him to be happy about the judgment. He was asking the government to constitute a Truth and Reconciliation Commission while he is a part of untruth and aggression. So, to Justice S.K. Cole, I can say that this judgment of yours is something that you don't have to be proud of.